So have you ever had the experience in a narcissistic relationship where the narcissistic person, could be a parent, could be a partner, whoever, says, why can't we just go back to the way it was? Let's break that down. So this is a galling thing to hear, right? And let's talk about why. So you're in a narcissistic relationship and maybe you figured out what it is. You radically accepted, you stopped putting up with it, but maybe you couldn't get out of the relationship. Maybe you could get out of the relationship, and we'll take on both versions of this in this video. The thing with finally understanding narcissistic abuse and what happens to you and what a narcissistic relationship is about, but really understanding it, is that even if you stay, hell, even if you are stuck in a trauma-bonded cycle, your behavior will change. Over time, it may be that you might take the bait less. Maybe you'll get a little more gray rocky or yellow rocky or just more disengaged. Maybe you get to the point where the gaslighting doesn't get to you as much. Maybe you find yourself not giving in as much, not capitulating, and you may actually even slowly cultivate other sources of support or go into therapy. Understanding narcissistic abuse or narcissism doesn't mean that it's going to stop. In fact, one of the most difficult aspects of radical acceptance is really seeing that not only will it not change, but then you have to continue to absorb the bad behavior. So now you really know what's going on. But that's when something interesting happens. For a long time, before you get it, the relationship is fully on the narcissistic person's terms. Because until you do get it and start getting into radical acceptance, these relationships are largely kept in place and kept together by the other person, the not narcissistic person, giving in to whatever the narcissistic person wants and knocking yourself out, actually believing that there is something else you can do, something more, something better, something in a way that you will actually get it right. And during that time period, stuff was really working out well for the narcissistic person because everything was oriented to them and their unempathic, entitled, and selfish demands. You might not even have seen their demands that way. And in many cases, they didn't have to even reciprocate or do anything. If they just didn't yell at you, you might have thought it was a good day. So when you really do start understanding what's happening in a narcissistic relationship, then slowly things are no longer going to be the way they want. And something I have observed this ending up in for people who are in these kinds of relationships, who do finally get to radical acceptance but cannot leave, is that the narcissistic person will actually have the audacity to say, oh, come on, why can't we just go back to the way things have always been? Things were fine before. Things were fine before fill in the blank, before you went to therapy, before we took a break, before you moved away, whatever. I have worked with folks in all kinds of narcissistic relationships, with parents, with partners, with friends, with bosses, who will say that over time, as the ground shifts, the narcissistic person will sort of strangely yearn for the good old days. I guess the days when you gave in to all they wanted. Who wouldn't, right? The idea, though, this idea of can't we just go back to the way things were, can feel so galling because it really confirms that they really didn't see or don't see what a mess that things were, that they really don't see how bad it was. It's confirmation that the narcissistic person really does not get it, that the shift and the imbalance, the disengagement, there's no way that it would be perceived as a necessary correction. There's no awareness that their behavior before was a problem or recognition. None of that. Just a sort of sick sense of nostalgia for a regime in which it was their world and you were being allowed to live in it. Many folks in narcissistic relationships hold on to the idea that maybe if they finally set the boundary, don't engage, don't take the bait, that it will change the relationship. And honestly, yes, it will change the relationship. The problem is that your shifts will not change their behavior, and that option was never on the table. But when you hear the narcissistic person pining for the days of yore, the psychologically toxic good old days, when you lived in their gaslighted mess with little regard for how other people were affected, it can really double down on that sense of not only feeling as though you are losing your mind, but for some folks, it even brings up feelings of guilt that you changed the ground rules. That's just the trauma bond talking. Don't let it get the best of you. And there is no going back in these relationships. There are no good old days. There are the days before you knew what their personality really was about, and the life that happens after you see it clearly. So when a narcissistic person comes at you with this idea of like, oh, gosh, I don't even know what this therapist is saying to you or what your friends are putting in your head. Can't we go back to the way it was? This video is meant to decode that. They really just want to go back to a world where it's their world. And if you're lucky, they're just letting you live in it. No more of that. There are no good old days. Thanks again.